Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Mary Fraser Meints, Executive Director of Youth Emergency Services. And Deborah, it's so fitting that we are here in the old market because Youth Emergency Services started because in 1974, our founders saw young people hanging around in the old market and they didn't have any housing. They didn't know where to go. And so they opened up their own house to these young people. Well, the young people decided to paint their cupboards green, and so the family decided they better buy a house instead of having the young people live with their own house. So they got out the newspaper and they found a house, and that was our first shelter. So we started with shelter and street outreach, and now we have 11 programs. You may not know that there are homeless young people in our community right now. I'm sure there's some here in the old market, but they're all over our community. We serve kids from every school district. According to a recent study, there are 4.2 million young people, youth and young adults, homeless every year in America. 4.2 million. Youth Emergency Services provided services to 1,300 young people last year. So that's a pretty significant number of youth in our community. We serve people, young people ages 12 to 24 experiencing homelessness and near homelessness. We connect them to whatever resources they need to be self-sufficient, and we want it to be what their goal is. So we try to meet them where they are and help them go wherever they want to go. So why are youth homeless in our community? There's many reasons. One is child abuse and neglect. Another is coming out of the foster care system or the juvenile justice system, where they didn't have the supports or resources when they left the services. Another is pregnancy, which is surprising at this day and age that people ask their young person who's pregnant to leave home. Another one we talk about, and yesterday was International Transgender Awareness Day, is LGBTQ youth are more likely to be asked to leave home. Economic insecurity, and did you know that being a homeless young person or a child is the biggest predictor of being a homeless adult? So we've got to get to these young people if we're going to address adult homelessness in our community, and we need every one of you. Domestic violence is another issue. Sometimes at home, or sometimes a young person living on their own may experience domestic violence of their own. So where do these young people live? They may live in the street, under the bridge. There's locations here that I could drive around, and I know where I'd find some young people. They're in West Omaha, they're by the interstates. We got a call that somewhere by Oakview Mall, 108th and Maple. They're everywhere, but they live in a car too. And they couch surf, so they live from place to place to place, never knowing how long they can stay. Think of the instability that that creates. Think of it as an adult. These are young people whose brains aren't totally formed, and that affects their ability to stay in school, have a job, have those relationships with their family. It affects everything. It affects their self-worth and their well-being and their safety. There's some specific groups that are at risk for homeless. We know that Black young people are more at risk, LGBTQ, Hispanic young people. I talked earlier about young parents and youth who've been in the foster care system. And here's an interesting thing. Youth who don't graduate from high school are 3.5 times more likely to experience homelessness than those who do. So we've got to do something. Another issue is risk. 1 in 5 young people experience trafficking, labor or sex trafficking. So people think that doesn't happen. It happens here. It happens everywhere. So what does Youth Emergency Services do? We serve youth by meeting their basic needs. We have a street outreach center, which is just down the street at 26th and Harney, and they can get all their basic needs that met there, and they can get other needs like accessing a mental health provider or a nurse or get some other services. We also have housing, which is important, and we have job readiness. So how do you help young people get out of homelessness? Jobs, housing, and all the support services that they need to get themselves back on track. We have many programs, and they're identified on our website, but I wanted to tell you the story about 3 young people that I carry with me all the time. Brandon, he was a tall African-American young man. He was in high school, and he left home because the utilities didn't work. The water didn't turn off. The heat refused to work. So what did that tell us about Brandon? He had a good relationship with his mom. He didn't blame his mom, but he couldn't live there anymore. He wasn't safe. So he lived in our housing programs, and he graduated from high school. And I sat with his mother at his high school graduation because we were able to recognize that strength between Brandon and his mom, and he was able to reconcile with her and be a part of her life. That's an exciting opportunity for Brandon and his mom. Pamela, teeny tiny, 5 foot tall, brunette young woman who went to school at Burke. Her school counselor called her in and said, "Your grades are slipping. What's going on?" And she started crying and said that there were things going on at home and that she wasn't safe. They called Child Protective Services. That really didn't work. She left home again, and she was living in a car. She had her friend take her to school every day because school was so important to her. And think of a young woman, a young student. How did she groom herself, take care of her hair? How did she get clothes? How did she study? She was so committed to school that she stayed in school. And she came into our housing programs, graduated from high school, and got a job. So we're so pleased about Pamela. Reggie. I've known Reggie almost the whole time I've worked at Youth Emergency Services, which is 9 years. He was our first graduate of our longer-term housing program, and he got a job at a security company, which is fine. He was also our first youth board member. And so we know Reggie very well. A couple years ago, he came to me and said he'd like to change his career and go into social work at UNO. And would we write a reference letter? So of course, I wrote a reference letter for him. And a couple years ago, Reggie and I spoke to his social work class about his experiences and how YES helped him. And it was a really cool opportunity. And it was on Zoom before the pandemic, so that was kind of interesting. So Reggie came to me this year, and he's going to graduate from UNO, School of Social Work, with his bachelor's degree, and he has an internship, and he wanted to connect our youth with his internship program. Not only that, he's going to go on and get his master's in social work. So Reggie is a very special young man, and I'm glad that I know him, and I'm glad that he calls me, and we Zoomed just recently, so that was pretty fun. So what can you do? You can be an ambassador. You can tell people that there's young people experiencing homelessness. Talk to your children and your grandchildren, because they may be sitting in school next to someone who doesn't have a place to live, or who's living in a car like Pamela. Her friends didn't know she was living in a car. Just the girl she was living with knew. They won't tell people they're homeless. They want to be invisible. You can support YES. Thank you for the offering tonight. You can follow us on Facebook, our social media, and like us, and attend our events. Or you can become a mentor. But the most important thing is know that this is an issue in our community and think about how you can make a difference in a young person's life. Thank you.